Hey everybody, welcome to Thinking Theology. I'm Don. This channel isn't about espousing a given belief. It's about thinking theology. It's like theological topics. Whether you agree, whether I agree or don't, it's still about analyzing the thought content of them, the logic behind them, if you will. Without getting too formal about it, I just analyze the different strains of thought and go from there. And this critique I'm doing of Dr. David Eagleman's TED Talk was requested by Share the Risk. So Share the Risk, shout out to you, thank you. This is 15 or 16 minutes long. I haven't seen this video, so this is like a reaction, and I'll just share my thoughts as they come up. If it winds up being too long, maybe I'll just excerpt some of the most salient points from it, but he's a neuroscientist. So we're going to find out what he's got. I love, absolutely, if I could go back and do things again, I would go into neuroscience. I listen to lots of seminars on a lot of subjects, but neuroscience and memory and how the brain, the things we're understanding about it is structured is absolutely fascinating on so many levels. So let's see. Oh, it's 22 minutes long. Yeah, so we'll see how this goes.
By a show of hands, how many people know what the deep field observation is by the Hubble telescope? How many people have heard of that experiment? Okay, a few. Okay, in 2003, NASA decided that it was going to take the Hubble telescope and it was going to point it at a little dark patch of sky. So it had already done a low-resolution map of the cosmos, and what they wanted to see is, what if we took this finely honed lens and we find a little patch of sky about the size of a pencil tip at arm's length, where there's nothing there, and we point it there for a really long time? Would we be able to see a star there where it looks like there's nothing? So what they did, starting in 2003, is every time the Hubble came around the Earth, they pointed the lens there for 20 minutes to collect any lonely photons trickling in from the distant reaches of the universe. And they did this 400 times.
I got to tell you, they didn't do it. It was a director of the Hubble Space Program, I believe, who did this and decided he was going to do it. And the scientific community, the bulk of the scientific community, was really pissed off at him for doing that, because there are thousands of cosmologists and astronomers and physicists around the world who want time with the Hubble telescope to point it at a given part of the sky that will fill in, they think will fill in possibly some of the gaps in their research or some understanding of gravitational lensing or whatever it is they're studying. So when he decided to point us at an empty part of the sky, they were upset, because like, you're going to spend that much time on this unproven anything. So let's see where he goes with this, but it actually proved absolutely one of the most spectacular photographs ever.
And in the end, they took all of this data and they compiled it, and they put together what was there in that little patch of space, and they didn't find a star. What they found were 10,000 galaxies.
Yeah.
A galaxy contains 100 billion stars. So that's 1,000 trillion stars that are all just like our sun.
I love
right?
this.
And they have innumerable solar systems and planets going around and life forms that we can't even imagine. That's what's teeming behind this little patch of black space. Now, if you mapped out the whole cosmos at that resolution, it would take 1 million years. So I think this is a really good consciousness raiser to start thinking about the size, the enormity of the mysteries that surround us. So I've spent my entire life in science, and I figured if we want to understand the mysterious existence that we have, there's no better way than to study the blueprints. So that's what I've been doing, and science has been tremendously successful. We've been able to get men to stand on the moon, and we've cured smallpox and polio, and we've invented the internet, and we've tripled lifespans. But what you really learn from life in science is that when you get to the end of the pier of everything we know in science, when you get to the end and you stand there, you see that beyond, it's all uncharted waters. It's all the stuff that we don't know. It's the vast mysteries around us, like dark matter and dark energy, or why mass and energy are equivalent, or how you build consciousness from pieces and parts. or what the fabric of reality is, or what life and death are about. These are all the things that are beyond the end of the pier in science. And what you really learn from life in science is the vastness of our ignorance. Now, we will, as we move forward, continue to build slats out and get a little bit more each year, but in fact, it's a giant ocean that's in front of us. And so,
one of my philosophy professors said, Seymour Feldman was his name. I was a philosophy major at Rutgers. I had double major. I was criminal justice in the other one. Descartes, Locke, and 17th century philosophy. And we were just having a discussion about something unrelated in class, but I remember Professor Feldman saying at one point that some philosophers say that the mark of a good philosopher is someone who walks around not knowing anything. And of course, we all scoffed at that, like, oh my God, that's idiotic. But the longer I've lived, the more you get into epistemological concerns, what constitutes knowledge, and who was it? I mean, you still need to have a practical side to living your life. And I don't know if it was Emerson or Frost, or I don't think it was Churchill, but the quote was, the mark of a first-rate intelligence, being able to hold two contradictory thoughts in mind at the same time and still retaining the ability to function. And that's just, I love these sorts of things here, but our ignorance, I mean, we should know the extent of our own ignorance and accept it. And I think that's why when we get into the atheist, Christian mostly, but the atheist religionist debate, hardcore fundamental religionists, whether Jew, Christian, Muslim, anything, and the hardcore atheists, where either side proposes to know something, and they know it to such an extent that the other side is wrong, and they take a side against them. That's where the social fabric kind of breaks down, where kindness breaks down. Anyway, I like his disposition so far. I like the way he's presenting the information he's got.
So there's no guarantee how far we'll get, and certainly in our brief twinkling of a 21st century lifetime, we're not going to get that far. So we're confronted with these very deep mysteries. Now, given that situation, I've been very interested by these recent books by the neo-atheists. So these are very important and insightful books. But I think they've left the public with a misconception that scientists don't have the capacity to gamble beyond the available data, that scientists are acting as though we've sort of got it all figured out. E equals mc squared, F equals ma, we sort of get it. We get how to describe the cosmos in equations, or if we don't know how yet, we're pretty sure that our toolbox will capture it.
To that point, I just ran into the dean of I was on Rutgers campus a couple years ago, and it was in the summertime. I was meeting a buddy for dinner at a restaurant downtown, so I got there early. I walked around campus, and I happened to run into the dean of the math department at the time at Rutgers. And I asked him, what are the crises going on in math? And he got into probability and quantum mechanics and this kind of thing. But I asked him, I knew what his answer would be, even though I didn't know him personally. I kind of knew. I said, do you think math is the answer to all of life and experience and explains everything? And immediately he said, absolutely. And I said, there you go, the search for knowledge in one refined way as far as explaining things in mathematical modeling and so forth. And I think Dr. David Eagleman might take exception to that.
But I actually think that's not a very good description of science. Science actually is extremely open-minded. It doesn't throw out the baby with the bathwater, where the baby is all the awe and the mystery that drew us into science in the first place. So science instead is very comfortable holding multiple ideas in mind and saying, well, it might be this, it might be this. The scientific temperament is one of creativity, making up lots of narratives, and then trying to find evidence to weigh in favor of one over others, but sometimes you just can't find evidence. There are many questions that are beyond the toolbox of science, and in those cases, we're perfectly comfortable holding on to all of those different narratives. There's not a strict need to commit. So that's what really happens in science, and so I've been a little concerned about this voice from the books by the neo-atheists, whether this is how science is going to be represented. I think that we know too little to to commit to a position of strict atheism where we act as though we've got it all figured out.
Good.
On the other end of the spectrum, I think that we know way too much to commit to a particular religious position.
Yeah.
There are 2,000 religions on the planet, and as has been pointed out by the neo-atheists, everybody already knows what it's like to be an atheist, because all you need to do is look at someone else's religion, and you say, well, that's patently ridiculous that you would believe in that. And of course, they're looking back at you and thinking exactly the same thing, right? So they're
Share the risk. Was this the inspiration for you recommending this to me? Because I think you watched the Bill Burr one where he said he was looking at other religions and, as an adult, and they all sound so ridiculous. And then his religion that he learned as a child, which were far more impressionable, made sense to him. And then he had to acknowledge. Was that the inspiration for recommending this to me?
There are problems with committing to any particular religion. The holy books of these different religions were written millennia ago by people who didn't know about the size of the cosmos and the Big Bang and bacterial infection and DNA and hallucinations and the fabric of reality. They didn't know any of this stuff. They didn't even know much about neighboring landscapes or cultures.
The one thing I would take exception to what he said is the fabric of reality. That just opens up way too many epistemological issues, if you will. The other things I agree with, though, that we just didn't understand those things.
Now, what's funny is every time I sit next to somebody on an airplane, I always ask them, hey, have you heard of the Hubble Deep Field observation? Nobody has, but everybody's willing to defend their particular religious story. And you don't have to be an anthropologist to realize that brains absorb whatever culture is poured into them, right? So if you're born in Saudi Arabia, you're going to love Islam.
Yeah.
And if you're born in Rome, you're going to love Catholicism, and Tel Aviv Judaism, and India Hinduism, and Springfield, Ohio, you're going to love Protestantism. And it's no coincidence that you don't find a big blossoming of Islam in the middle of Springfield, Ohio, and you don't find a blossoming of Protestantism in Saudi Arabia. If there were one truth, you would expect it might spread everywhere evenly, but in fact, we are products of our culture. That should be clear. The strange part is that people are willing to fight and die over this product, over the product of what gets poured into them and the stories they're told. Now, Ralph Waldo Emerson pointed out that the religious stories of one generation become the literary entertainment of the next, right? So,
well, let me think of that. To a point, there are still religious stories that live on.
So think about Isis and Osiris or the Greek or Roman panoplies. Nobody's fighting and dying over that anymore. Not too much.
Right.
But I'm going to give you an example of this. I don't know if anyone's heard of the creation story from the Bakuba kingdom in the Congo, but their creation story goes like this. There was originally a white giant named Mombo, and Mombo had a sharp pain in his belly and vomited up the stars and the moon and the earth.
Jesus.
I'm not making this up. And then he was not over his illness. He had another pain in his belly and vomited again, and this time produced the people and the animals and the trees.
It kind of explains why we're so screwed up, though. Anyway, I'm gonna cry. I'm laughing so hard right now on the inside.
Included in this second ejection was, and I quote, the leopard, the eagle, the anvil, woman, the monkey fumu, firmament, medicine, man, and lightning. So, if you find the creation story of the Bakuba kingdom an unlikely explanation for how we actually got here, just consider that if you were of the Bakuba kingdom, you would look at the Western story of the naked couple and the talking snake and the prohibited produce.
Tree of knowledge of good and evil.
And you would find that equally bizarre, right? And if you were Bakuba and you were living in Kansas, you would be fighting to put this in your children's textbooks, right? So I'm not suggesting that the story of Adam and Eve is suspect because there are competing stories. I'm suggesting it is suspect because the available scientific evidence weighs so strongly against it. So The Earth is about 4.5 billion years old by the best of our estimates now. The biblical account says it's 6,000 years old. Well, that's a problem because it has to account for why the Japanese were making pottery and the Magdalenians were painting cave paintings and the Persians were domesticating goats 4,000 years before the planet existed. So there are problems here, and I think that we could sort of safely say that we know maybe too little to commit to strict atheism, but we know way too much to commit to any particular religious story. So that puts...
Yeah, that's the fair treatment of that too. Because like, well, then anytime somebody wants to sort of save a theory, and they may be saving it properly. I mean, Einstein had general relativity and then special relativity. I mean, whenever there's gaps, then you could come up with an explanation. And it might be the proper explanation because you might be missing one piece of the puzzle. As an aside, Malcolm Gladwell had a really good, I think it was Malcolm Gladwell. I don't think it was Nassim Taleb. I'm almost positive it was Gladwell who drew a distinction between a mystery and a puzzle. A mystery is something, he said, that the more information you get, the cloudier your understanding becomes. Additional information makes it worse. A puzzle is something that the more information you get, it narrows, it condenses, it clarifies what that the unknown element is. So are we moving in the direction of mystery when we get more and more information here about the cosmos because it gets so big, it's so outside our comprehension because we get about 80 years on this planet. But I like the way he distinguished between absolute certainty in this regard and making use of available information and just really being comfortable with questions more than answers. We are schooled literally in this life in first world countries where we go to school from kindergarten, sometimes preschool, and you take tests and then you study math and then you study English with verb tenses and what's the proper verb tense and subjunctive, all these different things you learn. And there's a right answer or a wrong answer for a lot of the things, right? And so you get the red check mark. You got 10 questions on a test in 5th grade and you got 9 of them right, you got 1 wrong, or 7 right, 3 wrong if you didn't study. So we're schooled to look for answers, but we're not comfortable with questions. And I love questions. I'm going to die with questions. Just like my sphere of ignorance might be shrinking, in other ways it's growing. The more I know, the more I realize I don't know. And that's more than just cliche. That's seriously, to me, if you're open-minded and honest, that's the way it works. There are gaps, obviously, in the biblical account of Adam and Eve, but punctuated equilibrium is a way that's between this day and that day. There might have been all these years and millennia, and we don't know how long it was, and maybe that accounts for the earth and being older than the biblical account says and all this, but all right, that's going to do it for this episode number 1. This is going to take a while, so I might do this thing, and this might wind up being in 3 parts, but at least 2. So share the risk. Thank you for this. Folks, leave your comments. I read them. I'll try to respond to them, and you can make suggestions for other videos or questions you've got as well. Try to be kind with it because that really helps people open discussion about things, certainly with me, because I don't like mean-spiritedness. I don't care if you're a Christian or atheist. I don't care if I agree with you on everything in life. If you're mean-spirited, it doesn't work for me at all. So anyhow, I'll see you on the next video, folks. Thanks for playing along and keep thinking theology.